Good afternoon, everybody. Hope everybody can hear me. This is Chris Judge with the Native American Studies Center, welcoming you to the last Lunch and Learn of 2020. It's been a very interesting year. As you know, we started out the year with live learners here at the center. And everyone will turn their mics off. That would be wonderful. And come March, we did our March Lunch and Learn. I believe it was Ernest Jenkins who was with us today. Then we had to stop doing them, and then we started up in August with Zoom Lunch and Learns. And so this is our last one, and this is a special one. We are looking forward to today's lecture. But before I do that, I have a few announcements to make. First, if everyone will mute their microphones. If not, I'm going to do it for you. All right. First announcement for today is, as you know, my co-chair, Carol Shute, who is with us today, and I chaired a campaign to raise money to endow the W. Brent Bergen Lunch and Learn Lecture Series. And many of you were very generous in donating to that. And between January 15th of this year and last week, we raised a little over $12,000 for the endowment. And what we have done, we've taken $10,000. That's the minimum amount the University of South Carolina needs to do an endowment, and we stuck that in an endowment. We found out early this week that that endowment has been signed off on by all the officials. So we are official, we have an endowment. We have $2,000 or a little more in operating funds. And as you may know or you may not know, what we're going to do each year is we're going to have an annual Brent Bergen lecture. And we'll have funds to, in the future when we can do these things again, you know, fly a scholar in from somewhere, put them up at Kilburney, our B&B here in town, and provide them with an honorarium. And so we'll be looking for some very special people to ask to come and be those lecturers. And we're either going to do that in August or November of 2021. And 2021 will be a special year for us. When we are 1 year from now in the future, in December of 2021, that lecture will be the 100th Lunch and Learn lecture here at the university. So we're very excited about that. Let me give you a preview of the next couple of lectures, just so you can whet your appetite and be ready. On January 15th, that's of course at noon, our good friend Dr. Andrew Aga will be talking about Henry Woodward, the first Earl of Shaftesbury and St. Giles Cuso, and unraveling the origins of South Carolina's 17th century Indian trade. Henry Woodward was one of the very first British folks to live in South Carolina, learned all the Indian languages and became an Indian trader. And Andrew has just finished a dissertation which includes that, and we'll be excited to be here in that one. On February 19th, Maggie Spiver Faulkner is a member of the PD Indian tribe in South Carolina. She is an assistant professor in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Alberta, Canada. And she did research for her dissertation on wooden artifacts from Florida, the grotesques of the Southeast. And she's done some analysis on those. And so she'll be telling us about those in February. All right, for today's lecture, I want to provide a little bit of background before I introduce Dr. Carl Rohr and our two speakers today, Emily Garrity and Cameron Brown. If you saw the August Lunch and Learn lecture, our first Zoom one, you saw that I was talking about the elusive Cheraw Indians. And what I talked about, if you weren't there, was in 2001 on a site on the Great PD River, we excavated two burials, two people together in and those folks turns out we're brother and sister based on the DNA results. We know that they had a marine diet in their youth. And so where we found them was 100 miles from the ocean. And so that's kind of interesting. They were buried with some shell beads and some glass beads, a couple of clay pots and a clay pot. And what I did in my lecture was say, my goal is to learn about these people and tell their story, okay? And then Emily Garrity came to me and said, I want to do an internship. I have an internship to do. Could I do it at the Native American Studies Center? Turns out she was interested in forensics, thinking maybe she would go work for the FBI one day or be a forensic anthropologist. And so I jumped on that opportunity, and we were planning to do this. And then lo and behold, COVID came along, and all of a sudden, how are we going to do an internship at the Native American Studies Center? And we went online with it. The other good part about, if there's any silver lining to COVID, we got a second student, Cameron Brown, to join us, who lives in Spartanburg, I believe, or somewhere in the upstate. I should know this, to also work with us. Now, part of their presentation, you will see pictures of them working this summer at an archaeological site on the Wateree River. I want to just mention the burials are not from that site, okay? They're from a different site. And so Emily and Cameron did a lot of research for me and collected a lot of data on burials, all kinds of information from across the southeastern United States as a way of putting together a database. And then they chose two aspects of that research to do further research on. And so what they'll be doing today is telling you about the results of their summer internship here at the center. We've been working with the Governor's School now for a while on projects, and we've got a robust partnership going, I believe. And I hope that is something that will continue into the future. So with that said, I'm going to be quiet, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Carl Rohr of the Governor's School for Science and Math.
Hello, I'm Carl Rohr, and I'm a history instructor at the South Carolina Governor's School for Science and Mathematics. Thank you for joining the Native American Studies Center Lunch and Learn. My thanks to Chris Judge for inviting our students to share their work. And at our school at GSSM, we have a requirement of summer research between the students' junior and senior year. It's a mentored research through a university or other institution or an agency, and through student interest that generated the archaeology. And that's the best way to generate anything, is through student interest. But questions about doing archaeology projects led us to the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources Heritage Trust. And through that, students were placed into low country projects working on the Pocky site. Fort Frederick, we had a student working there this summer. For the first time, we had done historical archaeology at Fort Frederick. And so we also developed a relationship with Chris and the Native American Studies Center when Emily, who you're about to meet, actually instigated the contact for research about possibilities there, since she lives in Lancaster. And so Chris and the Native American Studies Center had worked with us before at our school in a couple of capacities, including a Native American Studies course that we do offer at GSSM. So there were adjustments made over the summer, obviously with COVID. And so much of that had to be through distance learning, but it was able to continue. And we were really proud of that the students were able to continue their research, especially when it became optional over this summer. And we had many students that continued it. And we're happy that the archaeology projects could continue with the Native American Studies Center. So I should probably quit talking here because you're actually here to see the students. And so I will turn it over to Emily and Cameron, and they can introduce themselves and they can show you what they did this summer. Thank you.
Hey, I'm Emily Garrity.
And I'm Cameron Brown.
And thank you for attending our research presentation. We did a research based off of burials that soon evolved into beads and commingle burials. We worked alongside Mr. Chris Judge and the rest of the Native American Studies Center. So a short introduction is burials are pretty important. They help establish how people live. They can help us understand the personal values in religion, and it poses many questions, as all tribes treated their burials differently. We took a more in-depth look at the shell beads found and the commingle burials.
So as for our research methods, as Dr. Rohr discussed, we were learning or doing research virtually. So Mr. Judge would send us research articles and journals, and we would take notes on these. And from that, we were able to learn about our chosen topics, shell beads and commingle burials. And we were also able to create this database, as you can see in this picture. And this database is data taken from different burials, such as any artifacts found with them, like a shell bowl or a clay pipe or any beads, as well as the type of burial it was, where it was found, and any data like that. We also were able to visit a dig site in South Carolina for hands-on experience, and were able to learn more about archaeology as a whole.
So we went to the Mulberry site, which is in the Camden area. While the findings we can't really talk about, we can talk about the methodology and what we learned at the site. The site had a mix of paid archaeologists as well as many volunteers. And our work included sampling soil every time we got to a new layer. That's what you can see in the picture of me right here. Taking levels whenever we dug a few centimeters or we found a very interesting feature. And features are areas where the soil looks different because of some sort of natural thing that happened. For example, on a farmland site, you would see layers that have markings from being tilled. You would also see, such as if there was a building standing there, the soil there would look different than the soil next to it. We were also sifting through dirt, as you can see Cameron doing here. This was to try and find anything that was remnant of the house. This included things such as pieces of pottery, pieces of pipes, as well as some minerals such as mica. And then we also did some physical digging with shoveling out the pits ourselves. And while we didn't do this, they also did sketch layers at the site to mark the features and what they looked like. There were a lot of restrictions with our research because of COVID. However, we were able to persevere nonetheless. We were even able to go up to the dig site like that, even though we had to socially distance. And then our entire research, while virtual, was still very successful because we did have many findings. Right. So I'm going to start us off with the commingle burials in Native American culture. And what is a commingle burial? It's a burial where there's two or more bodies buried together. My interest started with this at the Culp site, which is somewhere our research mentor, Chris Judge, actually went to and did a lot of research at. And it was a pair of presumed siblings buried together. That was also found here in South Carolina. The picture right here is an example of a burial. It's a shaft and chamber burial from the Towns Creek site in North Carolina. And this is just a representation of some of the things we looked at. So my objectives and aims were coming down to three major questions. Where these burials were located and how common were they? What do the artifacts tell us about our culture? And what are the connections between these tribes? And my overall goal was to come to some sort of logical conclusion on commingle burials and similarities. Here is a sketch of a commingle burial. There is one of the bodies, and there's the other. And this was at the Little Egypt site in Georgia. So where are these burials located and how common are they? They are found on site, in mounds, and sometimes even in what would have been a structure. One example of a burial that did stick out, though, was a moved burial. It is presumed that at this site, settlers came in and moved these burials to get them out of the way for construction, their own cemeteries, something along those lines. Another interesting case was the Huron mass burial graves. And this is near modern-day Ontario. And this was a first-hand account of the Europeans seeing these mass burials. It removes the individuality that you would see in other burials with one or two people. And overall, commingle burials weren't too common. A lot of the ones that we saw were ones between family members, such as a mother and their infant, or at the Kolb site, the siblings. So what do the artifacts with them tell about their culture? The only artifacts that were found with commingle burials were the ones at the Kolb site. And here's a little table with them. They had offerings, clay vessels, clay pipes, shell beads, columella beads, and glass beads. However, at every other site I looked at, there was a lack of artifacts. For example, at the Little Egypt site I talked about earlier, there was a male and female buried together. The male was 18 to 30, the female was just a general adult. Looking through the rest of the data, though, there was a female aged 18 to 30 who had a few artifacts, and a male who was an adult with a few artifacts. Despite sharing similarities to the ones in these commingle graves, there was no offerings or no artifacts found in the commingle grave. So what are the connections that I found? A lot of them were primarily in the South, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia, just because that's the main area we looked at. And with artifacts in general, a lot of it was pottery and shell beads. However, a lot of the sites did share European influence or findings of European artifacts. So in conclusion, there's not much to relate to the Kolb site or between any of them. But one thing that I can tell you is every tribe is different with how they do handle their deceased. And further on, there are always going to be more burials to find, more to look at, more to research. So more in-depth analysis of these graves are still coming in because not every grave is researched right then and there. Great. And I'm handing it off to Cameron now.
All right, so now we're going to talk about the art and significance of shell beads in Native American culture. So I started off with a few general questions about shell beads, like what is the significance of shell beads? And why are they not as widespread as you would think there are, as you can find shells in any river, lake, or ocean? And why are they found in some burials and not in others? So to break these questions down, I had three aims, these being discuss the process of how shell beads are made, discuss the trade patterns associated with shell beads, and discuss the importance of shell beads overall. So to start off, we're going to be talking about some examples of shells that are used to create shell beads. So a wide variety of shells are used, and these are just a few examples, definitely not all of the shells that were used. So there's prickly whelk, as you can see in the photo at the top, a snow whelk, a lightning whelk, a marginella, which is shown at the bottom, and a olivella, which is shown on the right. So next we're going to talk about a few types of beads. Some examples are disc beads, which is shown in the middle picture, a columella bead, which is shown on the right, large beads, and elliptical beads. So how are shell beads made? So based off one of the research articles I found, a researcher recreated the process of making a shell bead, and it ended up taking her over 10 hours to create one single bead. So how she did this was she used the groove and snap technique, which is used to create columella beads. And as you can see on the right picture, they removed the outer shell and they got into the center of the shell, which is where you can find the center spiral. And this center spiral is what is actually used to make the shell bead. So they used a pebble and they hit the shell multiple times until there was a deep enough groove where the shell could then be snapped to the desired length of the shell bead. After they cut the bead to the desired length, they would polish it with either grit from pottery or sand. So another technique is flint knapping, which is where they apply fire to the shell to make it easier to create the shell bead. They also use the whirl of the shell, or the outer part of the shell, to create larger beads like disc beads or any shell masks. And there's also drilling evident in some shell beads. And this is done using micro drills, which is the picture that you can see on the right. So the trade associated with shell beads are obviously found all over America, and shells that were found in the ocean were then found in inland, designating trade. So in Texas, there were marine and freshwater shells. In Illinois, there were only freshwater. And a more special case was when there were shells from the Gulf of Mexico found at Yazoo Basin in Mississippi. So these shells were traded by a traveler. And what's more interesting about this is that the site didn't show other evidence for a lot of trade besides the actual shell beads. Okay, so what you may be asking yourself are shell beads. They're kind of small, and if they were traded a lot, could shell beads be used for currency? And I even asked myself this as I was reading along about shell beads myself, and I found no evidence that shell beads were actually used for currency based off of my research. So the significance of shell beads overall, they were obviously used in burials, but they could designate several different things. So at one site, Indian Knoll, shell beads in burials were thought as signifying special accomplishments or levels associated with a possible hunting cult that the tribe was possibly involved in. Besides this, shell beads could also show wealth and status. So babies and small children were found with shell beads. So obviously they couldn't have made very much accomplishments. So they are thought of as to designate their family's wealth and possibly show any family lineage. They're also used for ritual and culture, ritualism and culture. So conclusions and further directions. As for conclusions, beads show personal significance, and due to the process of creating shell beads, they show wealth because of the long process of creating shell beads. They can show links throughout tribes and family lineages. And shell beads slowly died out of popularity because of shell beads or glass beads coming from European trade. So further directions, obviously archaeology is a never-ending field. You can continue to research more sites and learn more based off of new findings. I also hope that this presentation can help teach people about the significance and help any other future archaeologists. We would like to acknowledge Mr. Christopher Judge for helping us with this research, as well as the University of South Carolina Lancaster, the Native American Studies Center, South Carolina's Governor's School for Science and Mathematics, Dr. Carl Rohr, and Dr. Josh Whitten. And these are works cited for shell beads. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.